Democrats in Congress, including Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, are reiterating their support for student loan relief, despite what looks like a looming setback in the Supreme Court. The lawmakers sent a letter to President Biden reiterating their support for his plan to forgive up to $20,000 in federal loans for each borrower earning less than $125,000 a year, which they write will help so many borrowers as they continue to recover from the financial distress of the pandemic. That's one of several arguments Warren and Pressley have been making since the first challenges to Biden's debt relief order came rolling in.
The president's plan to cancel student debt will make a huge difference for tens of millions of Americans in their day-to-day lives.
The court knows President Biden has the legal authority to cancel student debt. And they have a clear and simple choice here. Uphold the law, and we can call it a day.
But the conservative majority on the court, which recently heard arguments in legal challenge to Biden's plan, didn't seem to think it was quite so simple. While they decide the Biden administration's pandemic-era pause on student loans will continue, at least for now, private lending company SoFi just filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education seeking to throw out that loan relief measure too. So what happens if Democratic efforts fail for the millions of borrowers looking for debt forgiveness and the politicians that promised it to them? Joining me to discuss are Massachusetts Nursing Association President Katie Murphy and Travis Johnston, a professor of political science at UMass Boston. Thank you both for being here. Travis, is it a foregone conclusion at this point that the court is going to toss out the president's plan?
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. Certainly the Biden administration, President Biden himself, has acknowledged that the prospects don't look extremely great. He's already hedging, I think, a little bit. And the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, has already sent out an email to 6 million borrowers letting them know that in the event that the court knocks down the program, payments will have to start back up after 60 days. So I think they're already preparing to some extent for the bad news.
Katie, the Mass Nurses Association has been one of the most high-profile and vocal supporters here in Massachusetts of the president's plan. Why did you stake out that position?
Thank you. Actually, the senator and the congresswoman invited us to take their student debt tour with them because it does impact so many of our members take out loans in order to enter the nursing profession and then to go on in their nursing career to get bachelor's degree, master's degree, advanced practice degrees. So a lot of our members are carrying a lot of student debt.
How much debt are you talking about? I mean, how much does, say, a master's level nurse, for example, come, or you can pick the level of education, but what kind of debt?
So people with associate's degrees, because we have multiple levels of entry, have $10,000. Bachelor's degree, $22,000, and a master's degree in the neighborhood of $47,000 of student debt. And I think it increases even more.
And is it fair to assume that for people at each step along the way, that if you're carrying that debt, it makes it more difficult to get additional training? Right? Exactly.
It's both financially difficult and you don't have the time because you're busy trying to pick up an extra shift to pay off that debt.
Okay. Travis, as we mentioned, I'm not sure that there were two higher profile supporters of the president's plan in Congress than Senator Warren and Congresswoman Pressley. Do you think that in any way, shape, or form they will pay a political cost if the plan that they said is clearly constitutional, the president clearly has the authority to do that? If the court disagrees, are they going to be hurt in some way?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they'd pay a cost. And, this will be used as a rallying cry to add more fire and more urgency to the call to student debt relief in some capacity. We've already seen that with Congresswoman Pressley pointing out the fact that Massachusetts has a number of policies trying to alleviate the burden for many in our community that's struggling, particularly communities of color that tend to struggle the most under this burden. 2/3 of those individuals who've already applied for this relief under this plan come from communities where the income is under $40,000 a year. And so as Katie was saying, these students, and it might not sound like a huge amount, but when you're considering how much debt there is versus how much your earning capacity is and how much wealth you already have, particularly with the racial wealth gap in this country being problematic to say the least, I think that there's a lot of concern that this policy getting knocked down would have a detrimental impact on many families.
Let me ask you about the political question a little more. My sense is that you've had progressive Democrats like Warren and Presley and many others trying to push the president to go in certain directions on big policy issues, in part through the use of executive, I'm blanking on what executive orders. Thank you both. Is it going to be tougher to make that pitch if the court tosses this out? And might it lead to more moderate Democrats getting the president's ear to a greater extent and progressives getting it to a lesser extent?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the debate in front of the Supreme Court had to do with the question of the 2003 HEROES Act and whether this action by the executive branch went beyond what was contemplated by Congress when they enacted that statute for circumstances exactly like this, as the Congresswoman and Senator have said.
What was that? Just a quick refresher.
The 2003 HEROES Act was explicitly about giving the Secretary of Education the ability in situations like this, in emergency situations like a pandemic or a war, to be able to waive or modify the expectations and the requirements on these loans, right? And that's explicitly what the law was about. And so for progressives, particularly on the court and in the public eye, the question has been, well, isn't this just part of that statutory authority to waive these loans? And at this point in time, the Supreme Court, many of the conservative justices had some doubts about that, and they felt that it rose beyond the expectations of what Congress could have conceivably have thought that the president could do. So pushing back on executive action here could certainly frustrate many on the left. And that opens the door to, well, do we organize, do we mobilize from their perspective in Congress? The Higher Education Act. Can we change it? Can we give the Secretary more power in this space? Though I will say the Higher Education Act does have provisions in it that gives the Secretary of Education the ability to modify loans as well, but it goes through a more laborious procedural process.
Of course, mobilization in Congress is more difficult now than it would have been a year or two ago,
absolutely.
Right? Katie, did your members think with unanimity about this issue as the MNA got behind student debt relief, or was there any internal dissent? I'm not asking you to violate private conversations, but I'm curious, one of the arguments that you heard frequently against student debt relief is, hey, whoever I happen to be, I incurred student loan debt. I worked really hard to pay it off, and people who are grappling with it right now should do the same. Did you hear that from any of your members?
You know what? I think we heard a couple of people raise that question, but not with a great deal of vehemence, because remember, as a labor union, as a professional association, but also as a labor union, we are always seeking opportunities to increase and enhance everybody's opportunities, in the professional sphere. So, we looked at this as part of our mission. This profession is open to everybody from all walks of life. We certainly are seeking to increase diversity, so it's a wonderful opportunity for people who come from poorer backgrounds to enter this profession and move up in the middle class. So there was a lot of unanimity.
What will the effect be on your members if the court tosses out the president's plan? Is it going to change just immediately in any significant way the behavior of people who work in nursing in Massachusetts?
Well, people will be delayed in increasing their education, getting their master's degree, becoming a certified registered nurse anesthetist, a nurse midwife. These are all very expensive degrees, so that's one impact. And also, last year during the pandemic, when hospitals were were hiring travelers to go around the country, and were offering, huge salaries. People were leaving their jobs at the bedside and traveling both around Massachusetts, but around the country. And several people told me that they paid off their student debt. So what happened is they were leaving their jobs, going elsewhere for only a temporary time. They weren't going to stay there, making a lot of money. And I kind of get that, because people, a lot of our younger members are not homeowners, right? I mean, this student debt has put that out of reach. So not only are they going to another facility on a temporary basis, they're also leaving their own team at their facility that now is scrambling to find nurses, and which is a struggle anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know staffing levels have been a concern of the MNAs for a long time. Is it unreasonable to suggest that if people do head elsewhere to make more money working as traveling nurses, that could make even more problematic the staffing shortage here in Massachusetts?
Absolutely, because we have the nurses in Massachusetts, but what we say is that we have a shortage of nurses willing to work in these circumstances, under these circumstances, and that poor staffing is a big, huge part of it. So if people who have tens of thousands of dollars of student debt can travel, pay that off, they are going to do it and leave their team even shorter.
Travis, you and your colleague at UMass Boston, Erin O'Brien, who's a friend of the show, we've talked to her before. I know that you are in the process of doing some work on the connection between student loan debt on the one hand and political participation on the other. What are you finding as you explore that?
Yeah, I just want to hit on something Katie said, which is that mortgage debt is a huge saddle and something that holds people down from being able to experience the American dream. Student loan debt is number 2 behind mortgage debt in this country. And the pervasive effects of student loan debt goes far beyond just pressing pause on a career. It has economic, it has physical, it has mental well-being concerns. And Erin and I have been looking at what are the participatory effects as it relates to being engaged citizens. And there's something disappointing here insofar as individuals that are saddled with student loan debt tend to vote less. They tend to be less likely to contact their government officials, and they tend to be less interested in politics. And so there's something distressing here that if these individuals are disconnecting from the political system, they're less likely to agitate for reform. And so I think there is a challenge as we think about if the court knocks this down, do these individuals continue to say the government is not representing me and they're not interested in my well-being?
This might be beyond the purview of the paper that you and Erin are working on, but do you have a sense of why that relationship might exist? Why, if you're carrying around $50,000 or $100,000 in student loan debt, you're not inclined to go to the ballot box or call up your elected officials who represent you? Do you know why that might be?
Yeah, we argue that there's kind of 2 pathways to this in an area called policy feedback effects. And the first is that individuals tend to associate their debt with the government, knowing that the government provided them these loans in the first place. You can think of Pell Grant recipients who are eligible for that $20,000 in this new plan, or Stafford loans, and many of other things from FAFSA on down. Versus another pathway, which is just the material costs of carrying this debt around you on your back. And so we look explicitly at individuals without a degree who have debt, and individuals who did not even pursue a degree who don't have debt. So in particular, and this is something that's being missed in much of this debate, and the Chief Justice, when he was talking in the High Court about the idea of an individual who goes to college and comes out with a degree and who can pay off their loans versus an individual who starts a lawn business, right? This comparison is a little problematic because half of those in default are individuals that did not finish with a degree and are going to be struggling to pay off their debts in the first place. They don't have that meaningful credential at the end of the day in order to pay off those debts.
Katie, you got the final word here. If the court, actually, you may get 2 final words. I think maybe we're going to follow up on something Travis said.
The only thing I'd say is that, people are not engaged because they're working another shift. If I'm working 5 days a week instead of 4 days a week, I'm too exhausted to go to my school committee meeting, to sit at my select board meeting, and to even pick up the phone and call my senator or congressperson. Part of me thinks this could be by design. Conversation for another day.
I'm really glad that you made that point. Let me ask you one closing thing. If the court tosses out President Biden's plan, will you and other MNA leaders regret at all the fact that you got as behind this particular move by the president as you did?
No, not at all. Not at all. And we'll continue the battle another day because we think this is, a societal issue.
Okay. Katie Murphy, Travis Johnston, thank you both.
Thank you.
Great. That was fun.